Hey there, and thanks for joining me for today's First Five. We continue today in John chapter 11. And when I was reading this chapter, I was reminded of something from when I was a teacher. So we'd always had the days when the kids would come in late. I would just take attendance, turn in the lunch count, and begin teaching. We were settling in our morning routine. And then inevitably the door would open and in would walk a student who missed the bus. The parents were having car problems, they slept in, or whatever the reason was, the kid was late. So I had two ways to react. One, I could ask, why are you late? Probably embarrass the kid, and honestly, it's not their fault anyway. The kid's 6, so really it doesn't matter what they say because it's not their fault. Or two, I could welcome them and say, I'm glad you're here. I'm just glad you showed up. So in John chapter 11, I'm reminded of these two choices. It's wrapped within the story of Lazarus, and Lazarus had gotten sick and wasn't doing well. His sisters, Mary and Martha, sent the message to Jesus that their brother was sick and were hoping that he would come help. But we see that Jesus waited a few days before heading to their home. So we'll pick up the story in verse 21, where Martha goes out to meet Jesus, and she says, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. So, I don't know if you noticed how they greeted him, but it's a good one, right? Jesus shows up and Mary and Martha are like, man, where you been? You're too late. You missed it. If only you'd been here earlier, our brother would still be alive. And it kind of reminds me of the lyrics of that song, Yes, I Will, when it goes, I count on one thing, the same God that never fails, will not fail me now, you won't fail me now. In the waiting, the same God who is never late is working all things out. He's working all things out. So for these sisters, it definitely felt like God was late, right? Like they knew if he would have been there on time, he could have fixed this. Lazarus would still be here, their brother would be alive. But what we see later is this. Jesus weeps with them. In their grieving, Jesus grieved with them. We know that suffering, pain, sickness, and death in this world are going to happen. But because of Jesus, because he died and was resurrected, because he was dead and was brought back to life, because of this, we can live. We 100% go through stuff in our lives that totally stinks. It's heartbreaking. That makes us feel like we won't be able to get through it. Grief and pain and suffering are the real deal. But what Jesus does here and does for us today is he shows up. So even though we experience these tough things during our lives, and sometimes probably most of the time, they aren't fixed the way we want them to, but instead we have to go through them. But what we are promised is that when we walk through these things, we don't walk alone. That Jesus shows up and gives us himself, and through him we have life and we have hope. So when it seems like God is late, when we're wondering if he's even going to show up, just remember that his plan is greater and that Jesus walks with us through our pain and that the love of Jesus is greater than our suffering in this world. See, we can grieve and yet we can still have hope. So I pray today that if you find yourself in this moment or season of grieving, that you know Jesus is near, that you can feel his presence, and that instead of saying, "Where have you been?" you can say, "Thanks for showing up, and thanks for never leaving." So may you know today that you are loved and that you're not alone.